Hi everyone, this is Ramon. I am doing the explain video on loops. In this video I'm going to be explaining what loops are, how they work, more specifically the while loop, for loop, and nested for loop. Now let's start. Now loop is an iterative statement that will run either for infinity or for a certain amount of turns. What that means is that it will repeat any block of code that is within it depending on the conditions that you set. Now, the while loop runs based off of a conditional statement. Now, let's say we had a while loop that we only wanted to run for 4 turns, right? So it would run this first iteration, and any block of code that is within this loop would run. So if we were printing out hello, it would print out hello, reach the end of the loop, and then move on to the next iteration, moving down. And again, it would print out hello for that second iteration, and move on to the third, print out hello for a third time, and move on to the fourth iteration, and print out hello for a fourth time. Now, because we've reached the end of our loop, or the end of our iterations, this loop would end permanently and move on to the rest of the code. To give you an example, here I have a method. I'm declaring an array, I'm getting some integers to assign color values to, and I'm declaring an integer I and assigning it 0. Here, in my while loop, I have a conditional statement. Now, this conditional statement says this while loop will only run as long as I is less than the length of my array. Now, while it is less than the length of my array, it will run this block of code repeatedly until then. So I'm getting my array, I'm assigning my integers some color values, assigning them color values again, and setting the color of the pixel. Now, while loops have the interesting characteristic of potentially running on for infinity. Now, in order to prevent that, we have to add an incrementational command. So here I have I is equal to I plus 2. Basically, again, I am only affecting every other pixel. So let's see what that would look like. So pick 1, which is going to call out explain loop 1. Oh, so here's my original photo, and then it's altering every other pixel here. And again, this while loop is running until my very last pixel, until I is less than, or until I is greater than or equal to the length of my picture. Fairly straightforward. Now let's move on to for loops. Now for loops are pretty similar to while loops. They only differ in the requirements of the conditional statement. But for all intents and purposes, they work pretty much the same. Let's say we had a conditional statement where we only run 4 loops. Again, it would run that first iteration, print out any block of code, and then end. And we'll move on down to our next iteration. Print out any block of code, run any block of code, end the loop, go to our third, run the code again, go on to our fourth, run the code again, and it would end, since we only wanted to run 4 iterations. Now to show you what that looks like, I have my second method. Again, I'm getting an array, getting some integer values. Now for loops, again, as I mentioned, their conditional statements are slightly different. I can actually declare my value, my integer, within the conditional statement of the array. I don't need to. I could have integer I gets 0, and then have I gets 0 or I gets 1. But this is a nice way of keeping everything nice and tidy. And then I'm saying this for loop will run as long as I is less than the length of my array. And then I have my incremental condition, my incremental statement. I++ basically says that I will increase by itself at the end of each loop. So this is equal to I is equal to I plus 1, essentially. If I wanted to change this up, I could actually write plus I, And what plus plus I does is it will actually increment my counter before the loop begins. So essentially I would be skipping out on my first pixel. And there are reasons why you may or may not want to do that. But for this explanation, I'm altering or increasing my I at the end of each loop. So here again, I'm assigning colors. I have an if statement and an else statement. In this for loop, I'm actually altering one pixel one way and another pixel another. The first, if the pixel value has no remainders when divided by 2, it will alter it to certain colors and jumble them around. For any other pixels, so pixel 1 in the matrix in the array would be set to black. Now let's see what this would look like. Explain loop 2. There's my original photo, and then every other pixel has its colors changed differently, right? Now, whether or not you want to use a while loop or a for loop depends on the task at hand and also on your preference. If you want to if you want to confirm that you don't forget to increment your loop, for loops are definitely the way to go, because if you don't include your incrementational command here, you'll actually get an error. The for loop won't run unless you have this, and it won't run unless you have your I, your integer, your variable in here that you're using to fulfill your conditional statement. Now we also have nested for loops. Now nested for loops are loops within a loop. So essentially, while this loop is running, the block of code within that loop contains another loop. So our first loop, which is our outer loop, let's say would only run for 3 iterations, has an inner loop. Now that inner loop has a statement that will require it to run for 4 iterations. So once it reaches that 4th iteration and stops running, this outer loop will move on to its next iteration and begin the process again. So basically, our inner loop, which runs for 4 iterations, will run for a total of 12 iterations until the outer loop fulfills its run. Now to show you what that looks like, I have my last method here. I'm flipping this photo vertically and horizontally. Let me close these guys real quick. Now I'm saying for the conditional statement of this loop, I'm declaring my integer x and saying as long as x is less than the width of my picture, it will run, and it will increment once that loop ends. Now I have my inner loop, which declares my y integer, and will run as long as y is less than my mirror point, which I am setting equal to the height of my picture, and then incrementing by 1. And it will run this code in here. Basically what this nested for loop will do is it will flip my picture vertically, but at the same time it will flip it horizontally. So I'll have sort of a quadrant reflective photo. And just to show you, let's run our last method. Oh, so there's my original photo. And then here's my new photo. Now, nested for loops work better when you have to work with 2 different types of data. They work really well with arrays or with matrices. It all depends on the effect that you're trying to output. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope you enjoyed it.